that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder how gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Fennell. I am George Harvey.
And I am Tom Fennell.
There is Tom Fennell. And this is a set of news items that have been accumulated from the last week at my blog, geoharvey.wordpress.com. And we put together the ones that we think are the most interesting of the week and then read them off at Energy Week and tell everybody what's going on. So, are you all set, Tom?
I think so.
Okay, so am I.
We've spent the whole morning rearranging the furniture.
Adjusting cameras, and we didn't do it actually. The people at BCTV
and
did.
It's just a little bit unusual thing. You have to get a little bit, used to it.
Okay.
The other thing is looking at the monitors. It's not like looking at a mirror. They don't reverse.
It's the
right
reverse.
And left, and
yes.
It makes it look funky.
Yeah, it does.
So if I'm looking off into space, I'm really looking at one of the monitors.
Yep. Okay, we should start Thursday, May 21st. Saudi Arabia, the world's largest crude exporter, could phase out the use of fossil fuels by the middle of this century, according to the kingdom's oil minister. He said the kingdom plans to become a global power in solar and wind energy and could start exporting electricity instead of fossil fuels in coming years. This is from the Australian Financial Review.
Yeah, that's the kingdom's oil minister down there in the lower right corner.
Okay. In the lower right corner of the photograph that's in the upper left corner.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got it.
All right, our next item, if we can go on there, is from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Minnesota utility regulators approved lower electric rates for people who charge plug-in vehicles in their garages at night. The new rates, which take effect in about 2 months at Xcel Energy Incorporated and 2 other utilities, could shave 40% or more off the already low cost of charging plug-in cars. How about that?
This is interesting.
Yeah.
Some of the utilities aren't too happy with this.
Well, I can understand that. They would prefer to charge higher amounts of money and make more money.
How strange.
How strange. But
this is progress. We're coming along. There's going to be more and more electric cars on the road.
Right. Wholesale electric rates are very much lower at night than they are during the daytime because people go to work and shop and school and so forth during the day.
Yeah, yeah.
And at night, a lot of people happen to be asleep and they don't use a lot of electricity. So the wholesale rates are lower at night than they are during the daytime.
This is where batteries are going to make a big difference.
They are, because people will be able to charge batteries at night and then use the electricity during the daytime.
Absolutely.
That evens out the load and it'll make it easier for the utilities.
And actually the utilities benefit from this.
Well, that's the reason.
Because their load is more balanced.
That's
and,
right.
They don't have to pay extremely exorbitant prices at high time during the day.
I've mentioned many times that I've seen prices for wholesale prices. In Vermont, I've seen them up around 60 cents per kilowatt hour. That's wholesale. They're buying the power wholesale at 60 cents and then selling it retail at that time it was 15
cents.
cents.
Wholesale prices can change from minute to minute.
They do.
But the retail prices stay pretty much all day long. That could change, but right now they're constant.
The one that I think is the most remarkable is one I saw several years ago, in which the price of power in Australia was 67 cents per kilowatt hour, and then suddenly it jumped to $11. I'm sorry, it was 6.7 cents. Is that what I said?
Yeah,
it was 6.7 cents,
like
and in 5 minutes it jumped from 6.7 cents to $11. And then it fell back again to only $2. But even so, $2 is outrageous.
Versus 6 cents.
Yeah. And the utilities got to sell that power at a fixed rate.
Right.
Unless people,
stuck.
they're stuck. They're stuck. So it makes really good sense for them to be getting the power load evened out. Okay.
Yeah, we're ready to go.
Okay, PV Tech brought us this one. Renewable energy development company SunEdison has received contracts to build 33 megawatts of DC rooftop solar power in Southern California. Edison with solar. I'm doing badly with this one. With Southern California Edison in the utility's most recent round of solar procurement. SCE will purchase the electricity from 17 rooftop installations through 20-year power purchase agreements. And you know, if you think about it, 17 rooftop installations producing 33 megawatts is 17 really big installations.
Well, here's a picture of one of them.
Okay.
And it's pretty big.
It's pretty big.
It looks like it's not even completed yet.
No, it looks like they're building it. And it doesn't go all the way to the hills in the background, but it's big.
You can see by the angle that it's closer to the equator than we are here.
Yes.
They're almost flat.
Yeah. Well,
Must be Southern California.
Southern California is certainly closer to the equator than we are. Okay, Friday, May 22nd, despite burning more coal for energy than all other provinces combined, Alberta is set to wean itself off the black mineral, earning praise from a coalition of physicians. Canada has laws to close or upgrade coal plants, but its provinces have pushed through strict, fast plans, and Alberta could be the next to do so.
I think those are the two physicians.
Yeah, this is from the Calgary Herald. Yeah, okay. I don't know how many physicians there are out there who really like coal.
It was more than two.
You know, the World Health Organization says air pollution is killing off 7 million people a year. So physicians, I don't know. I think if they're interested in health, they will be interested in getting people off coal. And I don't know why a person would be a physician otherwise. Okay, our next item comes from planetsave.com. AXA, one of the largest insurance companies in the world and the largest in France, announced this week that it will sell more than $550 million in coal investments by the end of 2015. It will triple its investments in renewable energy infrastructure, and green bond to more than $3 billion by 2020.
This is interesting. I've said on this program before, if you want to find out that global warming's a hoax, talk to an oil man.
Yeah.
If you want to find it's real, talk to an insurance man.
Yeah.
And this article here says last year AXA paid over $1 billion in weather-related insurance claims.
Oh my gosh.
So they're very much on top of this because
Yes.
it's costing them money.
Yeah, it is. Okay, from the Lexington Herald Leader. A new government analysis of the EPA's Clean Power Plan shows that the proposal could further weaken an already battered coal industry. Well, is that a bad thing? Electricity generation from carbon-intensive fossil fuel could fall by 90 gigawatts, more than twice the decline the government analysts had predicted as recently as April. 90 gigawatts is a lot of capacity to lose.
It certainly is.
That's like losing 90 nuclear power plants.
Yeah, it is, right.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Man.
I'm glad you put it in that perspective because sometimes these numbers just go in one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I should point out that I said 90 nuclear power plants, but it would be more like
180 if they're the size of Yankee.
Well, Yankee was about 2/3 of a gigawatt,
Yeah.
a little shy of that. But it would be well over 100 if it was. It would be 120 or 130 if they were the size of Vermont Yankee. So
The good news is that's a pretty picture.
What's that?
A sunrise.
Yes.
A sunrise over a coal plant.
Oh,
Nice picture of the sky, anyhow.
yeah. Okay. Saturday, May 23rd, from Clean Technica. Australians in Melbourne have been negotiating for 4 years with various government bodies of the state of Victoria for an entirely solar-powered tram network in Melbourne. The network would be the world's largest, and it would make the capital city of Victoria become a world environmental leader.
Get something clear. The network's already there.
Yeah.
So what they're now doing is putting up some solar farms, really,
Right.
to power the network.
Yes.
So the article says, expecting to see rooftop panels on the top of for trams, you won't.
You won't get it.
2 new solar farms will generate the power.
Yep.
And Here we go. Big numbers again. The 2 solar farms would generate about 80 gigawatt hours of electricity a year.
Okay.
That's gigawatt hours now.
That's more than
still
I
a lot.
use.
More than both of us use together.
I think that may be true. Okay. Ben van Beurden, and I am undoubtedly pronouncing that wrong because I don't speak Dutch.
Well, there he is.
Okay, now you know what he looks like, even if you don't know what his name sounds like. The chief executive of Shell has endorsed warnings that the world's fossil fuel reserves cannot be burned unless some way is found to capture their carbon emissions. The oil boss has also predicted that global energy system will become zero carbon neutral by the end of the century. This is from The Guardian.
This was a very long, but a very good, comprehensive article.
Yes.
And this guy's saying things that I never thought I would hear.
From an
A
oil
Shell
man.
man and an
Yeah,
oil man.
yeah.
But he's guarding his language very much.
Yes.
But he's still saying these things.
Yep.
I put up, if you can read it here, the URL to this article.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's probably too long to catch it because if I leave it on the screen long enough, we won't be able to talk about the next item.
Well, you can get to the article through the blog,
Yeah, right.
through the geoharvey.wordpress.com.
This is well worth looking at.
Yeah.
And if you forget all of that, his name is Ben van Beurden. You probably Google that and find him.
Yeah, that is Beurden. But you can go to geoharvey.wordpress.com, go to Saturday, May 23rd, and that will be in the World section. Okay, that was from The Guardian. This is from Clean Technica. Over 2,000 business leaders, political leaders, and senior climate negotiators at the Business and Climate Summit pledged to lead a global transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy. The question is, who will lead this? And the problem is that policymakers are calling for business leadership, and business leaders are calling for well-founded policy. So,
Which means get off my back.
well, actually, in this case, it almost means the opposite of that. It means get on somebody's back. But you
not
can,
mine.
Not mine. Well, they're the ones who are calling for it. So you can bet this is insurance companies, banks,
Well, this is a
real
takeaway
estate
here.
people.
The chairman of this summit
Yeah.
called for an end to fossil fuel subsidies. And
Yes.
and we've talked about that. They're enormous.
They're enormous. $600 billion a year is probably the figure that I see most.
Renewable energy will not be able to replace coal in the developing nations, as they say.
I absolutely disagree.
I think I disagree with that.
Absolutely disagree. In order to deal with coal, you have to deal with not only big centralized generating plants, but you have to deal with imports or mines. You have to deal with new docks, new transportation facilities, transmission lines, and so forth.
And you don't even have to deal with the secondary effects of the pollution and stuff like
Absolutely.
that. Society's taking care of that.
And we've got so many places in this world where the people who are in villages that have no electricity are getting electricity because somebody comes along and puts in a solar panel on the roof, a battery in the kitchen, and a couple of LED light bulbs. You know, I mean, it's
well, their needs aren't like ours.
they have needs that are profoundly important to them that
Oh,
can be
absolutely.
met, but with very small amounts of power
Yeah.
that don't require coal and transmission lines. It kind of galls me to think that these people are saying that they need coal. Nevertheless, and there was today, Tom, the coal minister in India said that they want to open 60 new coal mines in India.
In India.
Can you imagine that? That's the worst polluted country in the world, and they want to open more mines. I don't get it.
It doesn't make sense, particularly since so much solar's going on in India.
I know that. I know. But I think what's happening there is that the government of India has, the Prime Minister Modi is a person who's very interested in putting in renewable power, and he's been successful at putting in renewable power in much of the country, in the parts that he's been associated before becoming Prime Minister. And the coal minister, who is also, I think he's the energy minister or something, but he's Minister of Mines and Coal, or Mines, factories in coal or something, mines industry in coal. But he wants to see coal put in, and he's putting in a lot. He's building up this coal as much as he can.
Well, you can bet that the coal mines are not owned by the people. They're owned by a few oligarchs. And
Yeah.
that always influences things.
It's a problem. Anyway, getting away from that because that's not even one of
Moving
our
right
articles.
along.
Yeah.
This is an interesting article.
This is from Clean Technica. According to a recently released report from North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center, grid parity is coming much quicker than expected. It has already been met in 6 major cities, and in 2017, the population at parity is likely to be 71 million instead of the 51 million projected in 2012. You have comments about that, and I do too. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, one thing is, if you can't figure it out by the name, grid parity means that the cost of solar energy, or renewable energy, in this case solar, from the roof is less than the cost of power from the utility.
Right.
So all of a sudden you have a new incentive.
Right. So it's cheaper to be off-grid than it is to be on-grid.
It can be,
Yeah.
or if you're on grid, you got a storage system.
Yep.
You can have a store, and they're getting affordable.
Yep.
And the times they are changing.
They are a-changing.
It's going to be slow, but they will change.
You know, one of the things that I think about as I deal with parity, and this is something that I'm not the only person, I'm not the first person. I actually read this someplace, but it makes so much sense. What grid parity means depends upon your circumstances, and it depends upon how you go about doing it. Now, the question, for example, of grid parity in Vermont could come up. And as that question comes up, we have to bear in mind, are you talking about buying power that is made from a solar farm that is commercially operated? Or are you talking about buying power from yourself from solar power that's on your own roof?
Well, there's a difference there.
There's a big difference because you can, if you own your own solar system, you're talking about comparing your own wholesale price with the utilities retail price. And at that level, grid parity was achieved in Vermont years ago. Mm-hmm. And that's not just for power on at the level of the solar farm versus the rooftop. That's the solar farm versus the community solar system that's being put up all over Vermont. These community solar systems are being put up that people can buy into, and they own a panel in there.
They're sort of co-ops.
They're co-ops. There are half a dozen different ways that these things are being put together. But they are being put together, and it means that, and we will have Paul Cameron in here today explaining this.
Well, that's good.
And we're going to have, that'll be a different program on a different channel. I think we're going to see that on Channel 8. But there's a program called Brattleboro Solar Summer. And the Brattleboro Solar Summer program is incentivizing people to put solar on their rooftops, but it's also incentivizing, or in their yards, but it's also, another part of that is that there is the possibility of putting up solar panels as part of a community solar project, where your panels and other people's panels are all together. And there are 3 different solar installers who are doing that. There are 5.
Yeah.
There are 5 who will put it in at your house, on your lawn, on your roof.
Okay.
There are 3 of those 5 will put them up in a community system where a field is leased or
It
purchased.
could be anywhere in Vermont.
It could be
Doesn't have to be
anywhere
nearby.
That's right. It doesn't have to be nearby. That's right.
So it's really a bookkeeping thing.
It's a bookkeeping thing, but the panels are actually going up somewhere.
They're going up.
They're
feeding
putting-
electrons
they're
into
feeding-
the grid.
exactly.
You're sucking electrons out of the grid. They're just not the same electrons. But who cares?
That's right. Well, honestly, if you want to get down to whether they're the same electrons, when you have solar power on your roof and
Then
it goes
they're
into,
the same
and you're going in, no, they're not the same electrons. You watch those electrons go from atom to atom, and they're bumping
You're getting
another
technical.
electron over. Yeah, it's a question of technicality. Anyway, that's what's happening. And this article says that the question of grid parity is coming up much, much faster. And I think what they're saying is grid parity is commercial solar farms versus natural gas, versus coal, and so forth. And the price of power from solar farms is down.
Well, on that map that's up on the screen now, all the green dots represent cities where the solar grid parity is happening much faster than anybody
Yes.
predicted.
Yes.
The red ones is happening slower, and the white ones is right on target.
Right. And there's not very many red ones.
Well, there's more green ones.
More green ones. Yes, indeed. Okay.
Well, the headline is fossil fuel subsidies cost the world $5.3 trillion a year. That's $10 million a minute.
Yes. I
How
can do
large
something with
are
that.
global energy subsidies? The answer, quite a lot larger than we thought, according to new estimates from the International Monetary Fund. They say subsidizing fossil fuels costs an enormous $5.3 trillion a year, or around $10 million a minute. The fund says these figures are extremely robust. And
Yeah.
the takeaway from here is it's somewhat of an irony then that the IMF's new figure of 5.3 trillion is largely attributed to polluters not paying the costs of their pollution.
Well, this is something that we've been seeing
Yeah.
kind of in the past.
Social welfare, health, environment, broader
Right.
economic
But
impacts imposed on governments for the burning of coal and gas. They do it. Nobody else can fix it, so the government does
fixes it,
and everybody pays
or
for
nobody fixes
it.
it.
Or nobody fixes it.
And you know, the example that I keep using is the streams in Vermont that you can't eat the fish from, because even though they look like they're beautiful and pristine and clean,
Yeah.
they've got mercury in
Do
them.
not eat fish from the stream.
Right,
Yes,
they've got
fine.
mercury, and that mercury came from coal that was burned in the Midwest. And the figures, just so people will know, the figures that I'm seeing commonly for subsidies to fossil fuel industries are upwards of $500 billion a year worldwide. Most commonly, I'm seeing figures of in the neighborhood of $6 to $9 billion a year worldwide. And that is a direct subsidy. That is money that is going to fossil fuel companies in a variety of ways. For example, payments to help them go out and find more fossil fuels. Even though, for example, the head of Shell says we can't burn everything we even know that we've got, let alone find more and burn it.
Well, in America, that's called depletion allowance.
We have the
You get-
depletion
you get a
allowance
tax rebate because you no longer have the oil to sell.
that you sold. and then you've got other governments, or the same governments, that are providing subsidies for retail sales of gasoline and fuel oil and things like that in order to relieve a burden from the people who drive cars and heat their homes. And of course, that sounds like a wonderful thing, except that it keeps us on a more expensive energy system that is, in addition to everything else, polluting and reducing our energy security.
So because you're buying your gas cheaper, you're going to use it more.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you're going to use gas instead of something else,
Like a bicycle.
like a bicycle. Well, there are other ways. You've pointed out that you can run cars on ammonia.
Yep.
And
yep.
the ammonia doesn't use carbon. And the feedstock for the ammonia is water and atmospheric nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And when you burn it, it goes back to water and atmospheric nitrogen. So, you know, there are almost absolutely clean ways of driving internal combustion machines. But they don't make money
Yeah.
for the oil industry.
Unfortunately.
They can make money for local industries that do them.
Well, they could even make money for the oil industry if they geared up for it.
Yeah, if they geared up for it, but they're going to fight it. And so, you know, I mean, even this guy at Shell is looking at carbon capture. Now, what is the next thing we're supposed to be doing?
We got two things here for Sunday that we've both spoken about already.
Okay.
So let's move directly to Monday.
Move directly to Monday.
And this is a very interesting one. I got the picture up here, and it's a full screen picture.
Okay.
This just amazed me. This is a
Floating
solar plant.
And there's something very beautiful about this. And the thing that's I'll read the blurb.
Yeah,
The
might as
construction on a 2.3 megawatt floating solar power plant. You know, I could just see something like this going up in the Connecticut River. You know,
Yeah.
or you know, some other local
Well, usually it's
body
like
of water.
reservoirs that you can't swim in, you can't
Yeah.
boat in anyhow.
Right.
And these things prevent some of the evaporation, so that they're good for
Yep.
the reservoir owner.
The construction of a 2.3 megawatt floating solar power plant has been completed in Hyogo Prefecture, Western Japan. It is the world's largest floating solar power plant in terms of output. The plant is expected to generate 2,680 megawatt hours every year. It is more efficient than land-based systems because the water cools the panels. Now,
Yeah.
by golly, this is from Xinhua.
Here's a great picture of it now. They're a little bit slanted,
Yes,
so that somehow they're on a structure.
yes,
And guys are walking on it.
yes.
And here's the one that gets me. They got all these cables. And the cables are floating. How does that happen?
I don't know. They've got that all figured out, though, Tom.
I'm sure they have. It could be like they're adjacent to pipes,
Well,
air-filled pipes or something
the
like
cables
that.
might be constructed in such a way that they've got air inside them.
That's, yeah.
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 But this is something that's very neat. You know, that when you have solar panels in Vermont, I at least, having been raised in the era that I was raised in, always thought of solar as being something that would work well in this desert Southwest. And it turns out that solar panels are more efficient when they're not overheated. And so it works best if they are, since it works best if they are cool, even though Vermont doesn't get as much sunshine as the desert Southwest.
It's cooler.
Its solar
cooler.
panels
Yeah.
are more efficient. And so it's not as far behind the Southwest or Texas or whatever as we would have thought, you know, 180 years ago when I was a college student. So, okay. The Sydney Morning Herald says roughly 1% of Australia's geothermal energy, which is shallower than 5 kilometers down, could supply the nation's total energy requirements, according to a government estimate. In the state of Victoria, some of the best geothermal areas are below beds of brown coal. The state government seems to prefer the coal.
This is also a very interesting article. There's basically two different ways of capturing thermal energy, geothermal energy.
Right.
Two different kinds of geothermal.
Right.
One is where you have lava, like in Iceland.
Yeah.
You know, it's coming right to the surface and you capture it right away. The other, it maybe is a little bit dirtier. You're drilling down 4,000 or 5,000 feet. You got two pipes. You got a cold water pipe going down and a hot water pipe coming up.
Right.
You got hot rocks down there.
Right.
Isn't necessarily magma, but they're hot enough
They're
to
hot.
make it practical.
Yep.
But in order to improve your output, these guys are fracking. They
Well,
don't call
they're
it fracking.
doing hydraulic shearing, is what they call it.
That's what they call it, but it's basically the same thing as fracking.
Yeah.
And we still aren't sure as a civilization what the harmful effects of fracking might be. We're finding earthquakes in places that have never had earthquakes before.
That's right.
So
And that includes from geothermal hydro shearing.
Yeah.
There was a good example of that. There was a plant that went up in Basel. No, yes, it was Basel, Switzerland, and they spent millions of dollars building a geothermal plant, and they started running it, and they wound up having earthquakes, so they shut it down. And you know, the Swiss are pretty practical people.
Now, there's a statement here at the end of this article, and I'm not sure I can believe it. It says
What's that?
Roughly 1% of Australia's geothermal energy, which is shallower than 5 kilometers and hotter than 150 degrees, could supply the nation's total energy requirements
Right.
for 26,000 years.
You know, when I put that into the blog, I cut the 26,000 year part out.
Did you?
Yeah, because
Okay.
that did
It
not
seems
make
a little
any sense.
far-fetched.
Well, not only that, but it seems kind of irrelevant to anybody who's alive today.
Oh, yeah, I think you're right about that. I think you're right about that one.
Yes, indeed. But you know, I was sitting there thinking, if it's going to work for 26,000 years, how do you know it's not going to work for 45,000 years? And the answer to that is, I don't think we have to worry about it. Okay.
Well, moving along to Dubai.
To Dubai.
That's a nice picture of Dubai. The beach is right next to the high-rise apartments.
Oh, it looks like Chicago. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Recent bids in Jordan confirmed last year's results from Dubai. Solar is now cheaper than gas power in this region, with major implications for energy strategies. Bids in Jordan's recent solar auction were just over 6 cents per kilowatt hour, slightly above the record 5.84 cents per kilowatt hour from Aqua Power last November in Dubai. And this is in the national. And basically what we're seeing here is that solar power coming from a solar farm, being delivered to a utility, is cheaper than all other energy sources in a place that's rich in fossil fuels.
There's one more we're going to touch on it. That's exactly that.
Yeah. Should we just go on then?
Yeah, let's move
Okay,
along.
let's do that. Tuesday, May 26th, from Gizmag, just weeks after producing its first batch of synthetic diesel fuel made from carbon dioxide and water, Audi has laid claim to another synthetic, clean-burning, petroleum-free gasoline replacement fuel called e-benzene.
Benzene is what they call gasoline in a lot of Europe.
Yeah, right. A
Not our benzene.
little bit confusing for
Yeah.
people who are accustomed to benzene in the United States. The other thing, of course, is you've got to be careful with the word paraffin, because
Yes,
in a lot of
yeah.
places they
That
take
means
that
oil.
to mean kerosene specifically.
yeah.
And so if you say that you're using paraffin to can your jelly that you made, they think you're absolutely out of your mind. The fuel was created by Audi's project partner, Global Bioenergies in France. You know, this is an interesting thing, but it doesn't surprise me if they can go to to diesel oil. They can almost easily go to.
Basically, if they're coming up with methane, they can make almost anything plastic or liquid out of it,
Yeah,
fuel.
it's just a matter of knowing how and having a.
We have the technology. It's
Yeah.
been being done for years. It's just
Yeah.
a different feedstock.
Well, the thing that's important is, and the reason why they would release this information, is that it becomes something that can be done at a price that is competitive, where, you know.
Yeah, now it makes sense. They've been able to do this for a long time, but
Well,
now they can do it economically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the business of synthetic fuel for aviation fuel, for example, the Germans were making synthetic aviation fuel during the Second World War.
II. Right. So it's old technology.
It's old technology, but the problem is, how do you get it done in a way that people who are buying gas at a pump can afford? And that is
Audi seems to be on the right track here.
they seem to be on the.
I
on
read
track
this
for-
article. I said, we've done this before, but
That's right.
it was about diesel fuel, and now it's about gasoline.
Now it's about gasoline. Yep. Our next item comes from Clean Technica. And that says the government of Japan signed a contribution agreement on its pledge of $1.5 billion to the Green Climate Fund, bringing the total confirmed agreements since the Green Climate Fund's November 2014 Berlin meeting up to 58.5% of the amounts pledged. And this is well over the 50% threshold required by its governing board, and basically required to be going into business doing the things that they're going to be doing. So
So it's just another iron in the fire, I guess.
it's another iron in the fire. Yeah, absolutely. And then we have Communities Digital News giving us this. Ceres Investment Network on Climate Risk has grown to include over 100 institutional investors with more than $24 trillion, that is trillion with a T, in collective assets. The network is actively calling for an end to global fossil fuel subsidies and a strong Paris climate agreement later this year.
Well,
It
there's
is
Ceres up there. She's the goddess of grain.
grain, yep.
But what is a Ceres company? We've been talking
The
about
Ceres is a nonprofit, and it's in Boston, and they have.
So it's American firm.
It's an American nonprofit organization. It's a big organization. It has a lot of people.
Big, yeah.
And they have a website, which, as I recall, is Ceres.org. They have two initiatives that are going that are particularly noteworthy. One of them is institutional and other investors. And that's the one that they were talking about in this. The
So
other
they
one,
got a lot of well-known people that are
yes,
working with them.
right.
Levi's, I remember being one of them.
Well, that's the other side of this, which is corporations that are getting involved as corporations that are making a statement that they want to
Okay, so
be
we got
behind
one
us.
of them is the energy guys, and the other is other people are saying you're on the right track.
Well, one of them is investors.
Okay.
All right, and the investors are going to be people like mutual fund investors, but it's also going to include pension funds
yeah.
but they're all big. These are all
Yeah.
big organizations. I mean, you've got 100 of them, and their combined assets are $24 trillion, which means this is 100 organizations averaging $2.4 billion in the amount of money they control. And these organizations are in turn having an effect on the market. You know, we hear about, and in fact we talked about earlier today, the business of divestment. And many of these organizations have just said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to be invested in fossil fuels. $24 trillion is a lot of money. When it speaks, it's a lot of money.
More than I got.
It's more than the revenues of the fossil fuel industry, I believe. The revenues
That's
of
an
the
interesting-
fossil fuel
that's an
industry are
interesting
big.
Statistic.
Yeah, I added up the 21 largest oil and gas companies actually earlier today, and found that they were about $5.5 trillion, and that's a lot of money.
It certainly is.
But these guys are 24 trillion. And the other group that's in there is investors who are investing because they need to have that money in a liquid assets that they can use. And that includes the insurance industry and the banking industry. And they have to be able to make payments that go into billions of dollars when those payments have to be made. So they have to have.
They need access to that.
They need access to that money, and they are being negatively affected, profoundly negatively affected. We were talking about AXA earlier, paying out $1 billion. $1 billion. You know, look at what happened with Katrina. Look at what happened with Sandy. Look at what happened with Irene. We have billions of dollars in payments going out because of things that are, if not directly the result of climate change, they are influenced by climate change. These people are absolutely convinced of that, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. The other group is the group of industries. And that group that supports Ceres includes General Motors, it includes Ford, it includes Nike, it includes, you know, you just go down this great long list of...
They're all big companies.
They're all big companies. And what Ceres, I should explain this because it's important, I think, that people understand why this is happening. When the Exxon Valdez disaster happened, Ceres was formed by a group of investors who said, we want to have the rules set up in such a way that this kind of disaster is not going to happen again. And they started going around, and you know, Exxon Valdez was quite a long time ago. That was what, 20 some odd years ago.
But it's still not cleaned up yet.
And still not cleaned up. But they went to investors and said, we've got to do this. And this is, we've got to make things better. And the investors were saying, yes, I agree with you, but our charter says that we have to make money for our stockholders, not that we have to be green or good guys. And so the people at Ceres, you know, just they tried to do whatever they could, and they did whatever they could, but it wasn't doing very much. After a few years of trying to do this, making a little headway, but not a lot, they started doing something a little bit different, and that was they went into banks and insurance companies and said, you have to assess the potential of climate change to impact your bottom line negatively. And they were talking there about something that the insurance companies and the banks had to do because they had been put on notice.
And these are basically investors talking.
These are investors talking, and the banks and the insurance companies said, "Wait a minute, we can't ignore this." So they started looking into it for their own purposes to protect their bottom line, and they started discovering that in fact their bottom line was negatively impacted by climate change. And so what was happening was the coal industry, the oil industry, gas industry, and the industries, utilities and transportation industries that were dependent on them were doing things that were damaging the banks, the real estate industries, the insurance companies, and so forth. So they had to start doing something about that. Now, Ceres has put together institutional investors who have got $24 trillion in assets. That's a lot of money, as we've said before. And that's why it's happening. This is not because somebody wants centralized planning to extend socialism so that it takes over the world. And I know people who are saying that that's what's going on, but it isn't.
A quick takeaway from this article. It explains what you said
Yeah.
a little bit more simply. Burrowed deep into the business community, Ceres focuses on changing corporate culture
Yes.
with respect not only to environmental sustainability, but also with respect to climate risk, transparency and disclosure, and supply chain supervision. Ceres calls on its members to advocate prominently for stronger carbon limits and more sustainable energy policies in the U.S. and abroad. Currently, the group is working to get stock exchanges worldwide to institute sustainability reporting requirements.
Right.
Interesting to see this developing.
Well,
it really is.
Basically what's happening is one part of the corporate world is hurting another part of the corporate world. And that other part of the corporate world is starting to say you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
And
You're
they
reading
have
on my parade.
Yeah, they have demonstrated to organizations like General Motors that and some of the utilities that if they pay attention to sustainability and sustainable practice,
It's actually going to help them.
their profits improve.
Yeah. That's what they're saying.
Yeah. So I suppose we should go on.
We should move on a little bit. Yep.
North American Wind Power brought us this one, which obviously is something that they like to crow about. According to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which people call FERC, wind and solar accounted for all new generating capacity placed into service in the month of April. Wind, solar, geothermal, and hydropower combined have provided 84.1% of new U.S. electrical generating capacity placed into service so far in 2015.
And the balance from 84.1% is natural gas.
Is natural gas, yeah. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the remainder of this year.
Well, yeah, because so far this year, FERC has reported no new capacity so far this year from biomass, coal, oil, or nuclear.
Yes.
Renewable energy capacity is now greater than that of nuclear and oil combined.
Yeah. Well, oil has always been, at least always in the last couple of decades, rather negligible.
As far as generating electricity. Yeah.
As far as generating electricity.
We've never done it.
We had a significant amount of oil prior to the gas crisis of 1973, but a lot of that got changed to coal.
Yeah.
And so we don't have a lot of oil. Nuclear has been declining, and in my opinion will continue to decline. We may have another plant come online this year, but in general, I think it will continue to decline. In fact, they're talking about 4 plants possibly shutting down because they're unprofitable. And that's...
These are around Chicago, aren't they?
There's 3 in Chicago, and there's Jenna, which is in New York State. And I don't know what I think in the cases of all 4 of those plants, They are currently trying to figure out what they're going to do about that. And in Illinois, they're basically telling the nuclear industry and its advocates are basically telling the legislature that they want to shut down. They want to shut down those plants unless they get in essence, about $2 from the electric bills of everybody in Illinois, regardless of whether they're buying electricity from those plants or not.
Well, sounds like a good plan.
I think they're a bunch of socialists.
Well, I was talking about socialists. How about jobs?
Jobs.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about jobs. GreenBiz says clean energy employed more than 7.7 million people across the world last year, according to the International Renewable Energy Agency. The number, which covers people employed directly by renewable energy firms and throughout its supply chain, marks an 18% rise on the 6.5 million jobs recorded in 2013.
Yeah. And it's not just in the United States.
No.
China alone employs nearly 3.4 million people in the green energy industry.
And that is nearly half the people employed in the industry in the world.
Is it really?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
they say 7.7 million.
Yeah.
You're talking about 3.4.
So the
And
report confirms that solar PV remains the largest renewable energy employer with 2.5 million jobs worldwide.
it's growing fastest.
Yep, it was 2.3 last year.
And that's something which I think is extremely troubling to some of the companies that are the utility organizations.
They also mentioned something we don't hear much, but the number of people employed in the liquid biofuels sector totals 1.8 million, and wind power surpassed the million job mark last year.
Right. Now, the liquid biofuels sector is
That's big in Europe.
largely corn ethanol, which is actually big in the United States.
Well, I was thinking of rapeseed oil.
Yeah, but
Canola.
this is corn ethanol is big in the
Yeah,
United
it's big in the
States,
United States.
and
It
it's
is.
even bigger in Brazil.
Is it really?
Yeah, the Brazilians have got enormous investments in ethanol that comes from sugars of one kind or another, and I have to say I'm not terribly happy about this because corn ethanol, I believe, probably uses almost as much petroleum as it replaces.
Yeah, and you've talked about this. You lost performance.
I lost when they put 10% corn ethanol into the gasoline. My Prius got 10% worse mileage.
So who won on that one?
Certainly not anybody aside from people who grow corn. And
They won pretty well, and most of these are not the little guys that are growing corn.
no,
on
this
the
is
ranches.
big.
These are Archer Daniels Midlands and
Yeah,
stuff
things
that.
like that in the Midwest, and they make a lot of money on it. And quite frankly, I think they could make just as much money doing something else and have something else that would be more productive. But they make money on corn ethanol, and they back corn ethanol, and they hire advertising people with a lot of ability to do the advertising for congressmen who they put into office and regard as their pets.
Well, there's another sign of the times. France seeking to boost renewable energy and cut nuclear.
Yeah. Ahead of the climate change conference of parties in December, France's lower house of parliament has approved a bill aimed at boosting renewable energy and reducing reliance on nuclear power. Among other environmental friendly measures, there were 308 votes for the bill and 217 against. This is from the Jamaica Observer.
Some of the things they were thinking about, or this bill covered, gas emissions, nuclear power, fighting food waste. That's an interesting one.
Yes.
Banning plastic bags. That's
Yes.
an interesting one too.
Yes.
And green public transportation,
Yes.
of which most of the world is so far ahead of us, we'll never catch up.
Oh, I think we could catch up on transportation.
This is public transportation.
Public
Yeah.
transportation. You know, as I think about that, I think about when I was young. I was in my mid-teens. I went on a trip through Europe alone. I went wherever I felt like going.
Well, that was cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And I went to youth hostels and behaved myself far better than I would today. But one of the places I went was Heidelberg, and the youth hostel at Heidelberg is a little ways out of the city, and there was no transportation going directly to the youth hostel, so you had to walk perhaps half a mile, not a terribly long distance, to a tram, which was it was on tracks, and it ran into the center of the city. And when I got on the tram the first time, I sat down and I noticed at the next stop, and they had stops every couple hundred yards. And you know, they stopped and picked up a woman or two, and a little farther down they picked up a couple more women, and a little farther down they picked up a couple more women, and every one of these women was carrying one or more boxes that looked like pizza boxes.
This is going to be a good story.
And, and I said to the guy sitting next to me, "What are these women carrying?" You know, and he said, "Oh, they're carrying eggs."
Eggs.
Eggs.
I'll be darned.
And what they were was farm women who were taking eggs to market on an electric-powered tram that went by their farm. And when I think about public transportation, I think about that. Because the system that we've got in the United States, ostensibly, is intended to make people free.
Ostensibly.
Ostensibly. Yeah. What it is actually intended to do is to make industrialists rich.
Yeah, and it's doing a good job of that. What was it? General Motors and an oil company went and bought up a whole bunch of trolley car lines in California and shut them all down?
That's what people did. That's what people, yeah. And if you drive down the Sawmill River Drive going into New York City, you'll find that they have a bunch of bridges that are purposely built to be too low to drive a bus under.
I never noticed that, but a sawmill was not supposed to have buses on it anyhow.
It wasn't, and they were preventing that from being changed.
So these are these little concrete bridges you're talking about, over the roads.
Over the roads.
Yeah, I can believe that.
They have bridges that were purposely intended to prevent buses from going down that road, because the people who put the road in wanted to expand things so that personal automobiles would be the wave of the future. Well, I got news for you. Those personal automobiles that went under those are collector's items now. And
yeah, they are. They're all in Cuba, running on the streets.
Running on the streets. I don't know. I think the Cubans can keep cars going longer than anybody else in the world.
They have to.
They do.
They've had to.
Well, we are at the end of our list
I thought we were going to talk again about Saudi Arabia. It must have been the very first article.
Yeah.
But when I read that article, I thought, as you know, I lived over there for a while.
Yes.
And we used to jokingly say, "What's our oil doing under their sand?" And their answer was, "Well, God put it there. Allah put it there for us." I mean, literally, they would say that. But now they're talking about they're running out of oil. Or it ain't going to happen tomorrow.
And they're pumping it as fast as they can and selling it for a low price. So they can get rid of it. So they can get rid of it while they can get rid of it.
They're talking about solar. Now, Saudi Arabia has probably more sun than anywhere else in the world.
Yep.
It's all desert.
Yes.
But in addition to that, they have wind.
Yes.
From virtually the end of March till the beginning of December, there is a constant wind all day long.
Is that the one called the Shamoom?
Shamal.
Shamal.
Yep,
okay.
That's the Shamal. It's not. It's a pleasant breeze, really. I don't think you could live at 120 degrees temperature without it. But it's.
I wouldn't.
Here they got solar, and they got wind. So Allah certainly was looking at Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that's right. And it would be interesting to know how much power you could theoretically generate out of all of that. I bet it would be enough to power the Western Hemisphere.
Well, another thing about
the Eastern
Arabia,
Hemisphere.
so little of it is developed. It's still mostly 90% of it's desert.
Yep.
And if they cover that all with solar panels, they could power the world.
Yeah. Well, I think we should probably say goodbye.
We probably
we
should.
have a badly messed up sense of where we are today because of a combination of effects, but it is time
All
to
technical.
go. Okay, and so I will say, hope to have you back next time. I'm George Harvey, and this
Tom Fennell?
gentleman, philanthropist, is Tom Fennell.
Thank you for watching.
Bye-bye.
I want to point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I want to hope gentle rains can fall upon the land so lovely earth can stand.